Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here and I'm back with my Game Week 21 wildcard strategy video. Now the whole idea between wildcarding for Game Week 21 and attacking Game Week 22 is probably the idea behind going for a wildcard now to address whatever squad concerns you have, setting up your team with a balance of the ability to attack for 22 with a bench boost, and then also making sure that your team has long-term ambition. So you ideally would like to have maybe a structure that can incorporate Salah in the future, whether that's maybe because you have two premiums and you plan to go for a double transfer back to Salah when he's back, or if you plan to keep, let's say, another premium in the meantime for the near future. That's another possibility. I think obviously right now a lot of our team structures will be based around a second premium, so going for a Son plus an additional Ronaldo or Kane, or even a Kevin De Bruyne if you really want to go for that, even though he only has a single game week. If you actually look at Ben Cullen's spreadsheet, at this point in time of posting the video, there is no confirmation from the Premier League as to when officially the games will happen. This is just a probability kind of rating, which Ben Cullen has fantastically made for us and continuously updated to the benefit of the FPL community. So as we can see here, he's kind of rated teams as per how well they have structures geared towards Game Week 22. And Burnley, for example, have very, very good fixtures. Now, we know with Burnley, I think the easiest thing to do with this video is probably to actually look at each team and actually quickly throw out ideas in terms of players between each team for the most interesting double Game Week 22 team. So if we look at double Game 22, Burnley facing Leicester could be quite good because Iheanacho will go to AFCON and then they have injuries towards Vardy and Madison. Sorry, not Madison, but rather Daka. So that's a huge positive for Burnley. Maybe it gives them a little bit more scope to attack. They didn't look very, very good versus United. In fact, they looked rather toothless. Perhaps it's a good point of view to actually look at a defender like Lowton. I think he's the only player I'd really consider. I really wouldn't consider Wood at this time. It just doesn't seem appetizing whatsoever. Even if he gets to play 3 fixtures in that week, I really wouldn't care if I was going for Burnley. He just hasn't had a good season whatsoever at all. The underlying stats aren't there, and we know that they'll probably struggle, especially if the matchups are Leicester and Aston Villa. Maybe versus Watford he can do well, but we don't have any guarantees with that, so it's not that interesting. I still think Lowton is probably the most interesting and only option for Burnley. If we go to Watford next, I think the only option here is going to be King, because you will be phasing out of Dennis even if you have him at your team at this present time. Let's say if you wanted to keep Dennis for Game Week 21, it wouldn't be interesting keeping Dennis for 22 because he would be headed off to AFCON. The only interesting player is going to be King. Their defense is terrible. Even if you add, for example, the keeper points between both Bachmann and Foster over the course of the season and divided by the amount of games that they've played, even if they played 3 fixtures, right, and Game Week 22 was a triple game week, you'd know that they're just completely price inefficient and point inefficient as a team. There's no other options for Watford other than King, in my opinion. As far as United, the one thing, of course, is going to be a lot of projecting, I think, how well they can actually improve. We've seen them play terribly versus Norwich. We've seen them play terribly versus Newcastle. And they looked good versus Burnley with a structure where Cavani and Ronaldo played. And we also saw Shaw, who seemed quite interesting. I would say at this point in time, De Gea still remains as the best option for United. But you could maybe go into Shaw at this point in time. And Ronaldo still remains as a good focal point to have, especially if, let's say, Cavani gets to play. I think in that structure, he does benefit the most. The big thing, of course, is going to be fixture congestion at his age. There is a little bit of nice separation of games in Game Week 22 because there's a 14-day break from 21 to 22. So that is a very, very big plus if you're going for Ronaldo. And the fixture versus in 21 isn't very bad for Ronaldo. At this point in time, I'd say the only prospects for United are going to be Shaw, who's quite interesting from a kind of attacking point of view if he gets to displace Telles, which is something that he did. I thought he looked very, very good versus Burnley, but we don't know whether he'll rotate those players and play Telles next. I personally think he won't, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen there. Ronaldo is definitely going to be a great option. De Gea is a great option. I would definitely say anyone else is not that interesting at this point in time. Potentially Sancho in the future, but just not right now. He just seems way too expensive and a little bit too much of a gamble, even though he had one good game versus Burnley. With Brighton, you actually have several options, but I think they would all be defensive. Yes, you obviously have the potential to go into Mopé, but I'm not really sure whether I fancy Mopé versus the double game week fixture, right? It's going to be Man United, Chelsea, and Tottenham. Not exactly great fixtures where I would like to have Mopé in the game necessarily. I'd probably be quite interested in actually going for one of Cucurella or Sanchez. If you'd like to go for both, I still think that's a possibility. I'm not that high on Lamptey right now just because there is still the scope for him to actually play 60 minutes, and that kind of takes away from his ability to actually create and get points for bonus points. And as we've seen with Cucurella, who's the counterpart and a little bit more expensive, he does get much more points consistently just due to the fact that he actually plays with these double game weeks. Just due to the fact that he actually plays the full 90 minutes and can get bonus points. He's already gotten 9 bonus points this season, and that's because he's had 3x3 worth of games of bonus points, and that's actually a huge plus, and I think there's a lot of potential there, especially given that Brighton have rather nice fixtures in Crystal Palace and even Everton leading up to it. So this would be a good time, in my opinion, to bring in Cucurella. As far as Brentford, I just wouldn't be really too interested in their options. Perhaps you could actually look at their keeper, but I still wouldn't be quite interested in that. I think there is a potential to maybe go for a defender, but given the fact that their double game week fixture is going to be a mix of Liverpool and potentially United, maybe Southampton, which could be a little bit better. However, it seems like Southampton is more than likely going to be scheduled towards Game Week 21 based on Hassan Hutel's comments, so you'll have to kind of look out for that. Therefore, I don't think Brentford really have great options. You could go for obviously one of the defenders, but I think that's as far as you'd go. I wouldn't really be interested in Mbeumo or Tony at this point in time. Mbeumo especially because he's not going to be on pens, and then Tony just because I don't think they've actually created enough chances in open play to actually be worthwhile to look at as assets, even though they did have a great game early on in the season versus Liverpool. Everton, I think, is a great option. I think that there's clearly scope to go for potentially Pickford as your keeper, but he is a little bit pricey, so I wouldn't be sure of that. We also have seen that their defense has been rather shaky over the course of this year. They haven't really struggled too much with creating goals, I would say, especially with the kind of quality of their attack when they actually have Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Gray playing. Richarlison's going to be a big miss for them during this point in time, but I think Gray has been a very, very good second talisman for this team. And with Dominic Calvert-Lewin coming back, the one key thing is going to be looking out for fitness. So maybe you'd actually like to think about looking at Dominic Calvert-Lewin as we head into Game Week 22. He could be a very good option to actually bring into your team at that point in time, especially if he gets the game versus Brighton, maybe plays a very good, let's say 60, 70 minutes. That would set him up really well for Game Week 22 because the fixtures are perfect there. Gray also has great opportunities to do that. We know he's done well over the course of the year, creating a lot of open play attacks and actually being a very, very incisive player from the eye test. So that for me is very interesting. Gray and DCL are the only ones I really think about from Everton. Tottenham, we know the usual suspects. I actually would say that Reguilon has somewhat fallen off my radar a little bit, and that's because of the propensity for him to actually be substituted continuously. So that's a really kind of big detriment, in my opinion, to going for Reguilon at this point in time. Emerson is interesting. He's kind of mixed between Reguilon and Davies in terms of price, and I think Davies is someone I prefer over Dyer. He's overcome his COVID issues and he's played 90 minutes since then. He's definitely going to be nailed in the team. I wouldn't worry about that. The fact that he's missed one game, that was simply due to COVID. And the fact that he's overcome that and the fact that he actually plays in a kind of more open role as that kind of third centre-back who has the ability to actually push forwards into space as he did versus Norwich is a very good plus to have Davies. I would say Emerson's a bit of a gamble. I don't think he creates too many chances in open play. He's not as decisive as Reguilon. However, Reguilon has a propensity now, as I said, to be substituted off early. And Spurs are still close to that point in time where they have to kind of watch Reguilon's yellow cards because he could be close to suspension as they haven't played their 19 games of the season yet. So that's a kind of big detriment to going for Reguilon at this point in time. I would definitely say Davies is a good option from defense. Lloris could be a good option as well if you want to actually ride out the rest of your season with Lloris as a keeper. I don't actually think he's a bad option whatsoever. Now going forwards, I think you could also definitely look at Kane and Son. Son is probably going to be a lock for 80 to 85% of teams right now. I'm sure he's actually going to be the easiest Salah move from this week for people who still own Salah in their team. As far as Kane, he actually is a very good differential to Ronaldo because he has a good double game week, in my opinion. It's Arsenal and Leicester. Leicester are going to be very, very defensively frail, in my opinion, especially due to the impacts of AFCON on their team and the already pre-existing injuries there. They will have time to actually recover from some of the injuries, so that actually might mean that, you know, they're going to miss the key players from AFCON, and then they'll probably struggle versus Tottenham, who honestly have looked up on the rise, even though they just got a draw versus Southampton. I still think they're creating enough chances in open play, and the signs are there for Kane to have, I think, a good back half of the season. So I think Kane's a very good option. And I won't speak much about Son because it seems like he's probably going to be a fixture point for a lot of teams. Leicester is a tricky thing because their game versus Norwich has just been cancelled, and there still could be capacity for them to actually play versus Everton in 21. Maddison is going to be a great pick at that point in time. and then Vardy is injured. So Madison really is the only interesting point in the team. I think if you want to go for a big gamble, it could be maybe hoping that Tielemans will play in a much more advanced position, or maybe even going for a Kieran Dewsbury-Hall, who's a 4.4 mid for Leicester. Those are the only really options. I think people are going to be tempted to go for Leicester defenders, but I really would say that you should really avoid them. I just don't think defensively they've been any good this season. They've been in the bottom 5 for a specific reason. They've been terrible defensively. And not only that, I don't think you want them when Amarty's out and Soyuncu's still injured. And that's pretty much what I have to say about Leicester. As far as Aston Villa, it's interesting because their probabilities for having a double game week are towards the low side. So there could be a high chance that maybe that Burnley game happens either in 21 or 22, at which point it could be interesting, let's say, to have Watkins in 21 if that game happens in 21, and then go straight to DCL in 22. Now I think that's a crazy gamble, but if the fixtures actually are announced and that actually happens, I think that could be a really good single transfer. Even though it's not nice, I think, in my opinion, to actually book a transfer ahead, I think that would be a really, really good capitalization of double game weeks, especially if, let's say, they're going to have a single just with Man United. However, if the Leeds game gets booked towards 22, then I think Watkins becomes a very, very interesting option, especially for our wildcards. I think he's going to be someone that you want to be looking at in the near future. I would say that Watkins is the most logical option from Aston Villa. If you want to move away from Watkins, then I think Cash is another good option because Mings is going to be suspended for one game in the near future. So Cash is a good option, but I don't think Cash is as good as an option as people think. I think this Aston Villa side are defensively quite frail, and they'll definitely miss players like Mings, and we know that there's still a mistake in players like Mings and Target. So that is going to be the big detriment for me with going Aston Villa defense, even though I think Cash is kind of at that price point where people are looking for a downgrade from James, and maybe he makes sense, but I would probably stay away from that. I think the only option I'd really consider from Aston Villa is going to be Watkins, as Buendia seems to be injured. With West Ham United, I think the focal points are clear. It's going to be both Bo and Antonio. Benrahma's not going to be an interesting option because of the AFCON commitments. And unfortunately, Fornals and Lanzini aren't really exciting options at this point in time. I would probably stay away from them. Their defense is also a tricky situation where I think Soufal is, in a sense, nailed, but isn't really an option I'd like to go for because he doesn't take set pieces. If you notice, Bowen is the one who takes right-sided corners, and that's going to be a big detriment for people who want to go into Bowen and go into Soufal. And his chances in open play have dropped off quite considerably from the previous year. So I don't think it really makes sense to go for any West Ham defenders. And we've recently seen a lot of rotation between both Johnson and Masuaku, which means it's not interesting at all to go for either of them. With Leeds, I think the only option here is going to be Rafinha. It's a very, very quick skip, I think, in terms of discussing the games. Unfortunately, their double game weeks don't seem that appetizing. If you have a double game week of West Ham United and Liverpool, I wouldn't be that tempted to really have Rafinha. Yes, he's on penalties, which is going to be a huge plus, and I think Rafinha could be a good option to go for if you're looking for a wild card. But I might actually still say that Rafinha is someone that we'd probably want to look at after double game week 22, where the fixture run between Newcastle, Aston Villa, Everton, Man United are not bad games at all to own Rafinha. I just wouldn't be very happy to own Rafinha when he's playing versus Liverpool and West Ham, and that's pretty much how I think about that. Arsenal isn't that interesting at all if you look at the future. If you look, and actually I would say this about Arsenal, Chelsea, and Liverpool. Now Chelsea and Liverpool is a little bit of an isolated situation because I think everyone in the league is going to keep 2 Liverpool players and going to drop Salah for this point in time. Do keep in mind that they have a blank in 27, so that's going to be a huge kind of impact on teams, because if you actually, let's say, go into Salah immediately in 24 when he returns from AFCON, then you're basically going to have him for 3 games, Leicester, Burnley, and then Norwich, and then you're going to have a blank game week. That's going to be a little bit tough because you actually will need a full playing 11 for that week, and hopefully that you do have the ability to do that. But there is actually a good argument to say that maybe you could instead of going for Salah then, maybe go for someone like Kevin De Bruyne before you go for Salah, and maybe go for Salah in 28 onwards, if that's a possibility. I know a lot of people want to go immediately back into Salah, so that's totally up to you. I'm sure you keep Jota and Trent. There's no options there. You could maybe, during this run, go for an Origi, go for a Minamino, but I don't really think it's that tempting at this point in time. Even Firmino, in my opinion, is way too overpriced compared to some of the other talismans that we've just mentioned, especially between Antonio, Watkins, and DCL. Chelsea just isn't interesting whatsoever. Their double game week is a poor week. Their single game week before that is a very bad week. So it's a great time to move out of Chelsea. If you only own James at this point in time, it's a nice time to move out, especially if you own Mount and own money in Mount. Then I think that's a very good time to actually downgrade Mount into another interesting 6.5 to 6.8 attacking midfielder in the near future. As far as Arsenal, the issue with them is just, once again, the fixtures are just poor for the double game weeks and the single game weeks. They're playing City next, And there's only a really nice fixture schedule where they have 23 and 24 between Burnley and Wolves. And then they've got Chelsea, which could be a potential blank. And then they've got a guaranteed blank in 27. So it's not appetizing whatsoever, in my opinion, to go for Arsenal, especially since they have not the best fixtures and potential blanks. With Crystal Palace, I think you have the possibility for a double game week between Brighton and Watford. And that Watford game could go between 21 or 22. Highly likely for it to go for 22. At this point in time, with Gallagher having COVID, you're going to miss out on half of the games in 21 at the very minimum if Watford gets scheduled a little bit later. Maybe if Gallagher tests negative in the near future, then you could actually benefit from having him play versus Watford and Brighton. But I wouldn't really fancy going for Gallagher now. It's probably a good time to move out of Gallagher, going into someone like a Rafinha or even a Gray. Brighton and Watford are nice games. Edouard maybe could be an option to keep, especially during this entire run. I think Edouard's the only logical option at this point in time. As far as Southampton, I think there's no real logical options beyond maybe going for Broja. I'm not that tempted. I think 21, it could be a good fixture week for them because they could have a double up between Newcastle and Brentford. But keep in mind that the Newcastle game is on a knife's edge. It could be discontinued. So Broja is, for me, the only interesting option there. If you want to go for a kind of extreme gamble, I guess you can go for James Ward-Prowse, but kind of picking the games where James Ward-Prowse is going to pop off is a little bit tough because he is very reliant in a sense from his ability to create from set pieces, and you're kind of looking for a penalty, looking for a very good free kick from him, and it's hard to gamble which weeks he's going to do that in, right? I guess none of us really would have anticipated him scoring versus Tottenham, but he did. And that's kind of the problem with going for James Ward-Prowse. Bednarek could be an option. He's been a very consistent goal-scoring threat, but I would probably avoid. Same thing with Kyle Walker-Peters. As far as Norwich, the blank with Leicester is not a very, very good plus. Then they actually have okay games for Everton and West Ham, but it's Norwich, so really, I mean, what are we talking about here? Wolves is an interesting one because if, let's say, 22 is a good double game week, then I think Cody becomes a very good option to have, and Sa as well becomes a very good option to have. I would probably actually prefer going for Lloris long term in terms of all the keepers in the game right now, just because I think he has a smooth run. Maybe you could actually think about swapping into Ramsdale in the very near future. Let's say when I think Ramsdale has very good fixtures after 28, after that kind of blank in 27. So that could be a good time to move into Ramsdale if you want to lock a keeper transfer there for some reason, and you don't really want to go for Ramsdale in the near future. But I like Lloris because he has a very good double game week, and I think he's a little bit more interesting than De Gea because the underlying stats have been there for the Spurs team, whereas with United, we know they've been very, very easily losing their clean sheet, and it's not a huge plus to have a team that loses clean sheets consistently, even versus weaker teams. So that's going to be a big detriment from going for United at this point in time. I would say with Southampton, the interesting thing is, sorry, not Southampton. I would say with Sa, Wolves have been incredibly impressive from keeping clean sheets this season. They're third and actually joint second, I believe, in terms of actually goals conceded. So we've already gone through the halfway point in the season, and they've done tremendously well. They've obviously overperformed their stats very well, but I think Sa is a very good keeper to have. Man City, I think there's nothing else to really discuss here. I think you probably want to ride out this fixture run with maybe 2 City players at best. It seems like Cancelo could miss 21 due to the unfortunate attack that happened to him. So all, my best wishes are to him and his family as well. I hope he's recovering fine. But the fixtures aren't great. Arsenal and Chelsea, arguably. And I think the great run is going to be 23 and onward. So there's a definite scope to go into, let's say, a third City player after 22, but I wouldn't really head into 21 and 22 with 3 City players. I think it's probably advisable to go with 2 at best. Newcastle, probably not very interesting at all. Unfortunately, their defense just isn't good enough, and unless you're going for St. Maximin, I just don't think there's really any gambles there with Newcastle, especially since they're much more cheaper forwards who are interesting, such as King, who has a lot of games. And then we have much more solid teams who are creating much more chances and creating penalty opportunities. Right, so now actually let's have a look at maybe potential templates that we can feature. This is just a very draft template. But I think the interesting here with Bench Boost 22 is that you have to have 2 keepers. You want to have a season keeper that is going to play for the rest of the season, and then you probably want to have an alternate keeper who actually has good fixtures. I think Sanchez is at that price point where I think he should be considered. We probably have a lot of team value at this point in time. I think Sanchez has very, very good double game week 21 and 22 games. 21 isn't really a big thing. You're bench boosting 22. However, you want to kind of look at the weaknesses of your enemy of your alternative keeper, right? If let's say I go for Lloris, who is a placeholder that I have now. Lloris has bad games versus Chelsea in 23 and bad games versus City in 26, and Sanchez has nice fixtures in place of that. So he's got Leicester in 23, which is going to be a hopefully Leicester forward less attack. and then a 26 game versus Burnley at home, which means he's a very, very good keeper to put in place of Lloris when he's got bad games, so to speak. As far as, let's say, the defense, I think Lowton is going to be a huge gamble, as you can see here. He doesn't really make sense as someone who you want to play off the bench, to be honest, but he has a very, very interesting double game week 22 potential. And I think as someone who is a set piece creator, someone who does actually provide quite consistently for this Burnley team with 1 goal and 3 assists so far this season, he is an interesting outsider and a bit of an outlier that I think that you could bring into the team for a gamble for double game week 22. Trent and Cancelo are non-negotiables. They're clearly people that you want to ride with until the rest of the season, even with the Cancelo news with him unfortunately being attacked, which I hope he is doing exceptionally fine with and kind of recovering as much as possible. Even if you miss Cancelo for the next game, he's probably going to be back in the near future and ready to play. So that's going to be a nice little plus for Cancelo. A lot of people will be probably thinking about maybe going for a double up of City at this point in time because they seem to be the only team worth going for a quadruple defense for. I would say it's probably worth looking towards getting a third City player by game week 24 because it doesn't really make sense to actually attack them in 22. They have an okay fixture in 21, but probably could still, let's say, concede versus an Arsenal team who are in form. And then we actually have the possibility to actually go for alternative defenders at this point in time. I've got 5.0 in this template, so this could actually be changed from either Shaw, because I don't have De Gea in this team, and Shaw, who has actually done quite well, as I mentioned, in the previous game versus Burnley, into, let's say, someone like a Cucurella if you want to double up on a Brighton, or you can go for a cash from Aston Villa if they have confirmed double game week 22 fixtures that are nice. So that's another possibility there. Cody is someone who, if there is a double game week 22, is someone that I'm interested in. I also think Wolves cover from the bench very, very well defensively because they've gotten a lot of clean sheets, even versus very, very tough teams so far. So that's a really big plus with having Cody in our team. I think there's also a possibility to discuss a change between Lloris and Cody. You could actually go for Davies instead from Tottenham, and then actually go for Jose Sa if you actually maybe need a little bit of money or you have a little bit more faith long term in the Wolves defense. The reason why I'm probably a bit more of a fan of Lloris and Cody at this point in time is because I actually think that Spurs have done tremendously well post Conte, and you can actually see that with their expected goals allowed already rising to second in the table. So that kind of leads them behind City in terms of expected goals allowed, kind of suggesting that under one of the kind of major stats that we actually look at defense, that they are the second best defense in the league potentially. So that's actually a really positive sign if you're actually looking towards going for Spurs players. So that's another possibility there. With Jota, Foden, Son, and Bowen, I think that they're non-negotiable for during this kind of fixture run. Perhaps you'd like to maybe change Foden into someone else. Foden could potentially be another player. If you look at my forward line, there's clearly King, who could be pushed up to a DCL or Watkins if you want. And then if you want to move, let's say, Foden and downgrade him into a player, then you could actually downgrade him into someone like a Rafinha or Madison and kind of spend that extra money into going players like I mentioned with Watkins and DCL. Jota and Foden, for me, I just think are very interesting because with Foden, you have to kind of look at his fixture history, where when Pep has confidence in a player, in my opinion, and there's enough space between games where you can actually afford rest, especially in a time where Grealish isn't playing exceptionally well, and then has also kind of fallen out of favor of the manager as well due to his kind of night out kind of conflict, and then Mara is also heading towards AFCON. You don't really actually have that much spots that really need rotation, right? It could just be rotation between Jesus and Sterling as well, who would be competing with some of the positions with Foden. But I like the ability for Foden to play because he was pretty much nailed to play for most games until he really got injured at this point in time when he played in this Everton game, was subbed off early, and then was seemingly injured for a few games during this period between 12 and 16. It seems like he's fully fit now. He played very well versus Brentford, so that's a really good basis to say that Foden is a nice keeper to have, at least to hedge versus some of the Man City midfielders. I think it's not really worth to have 3 Man City midfielders at this point in time, but Foden is a very interesting one for me to keep, and he is still at a fantastic price point for me, especially since he leads City for a lot of those underlying stats outside of Mahrez. Son, I think there's no real kind of explanation. He's clearly someone that we want to go for this duo premium structure with, right? Whether it's going to be Salah and Son in the future, KDB and Son for the future, or even Kane or Ronaldo and Son for the future. Son seems to be that kind of constant because he's much cheaper, much more affordable, and is providing as much nearly as basically non-Salah players and premiums in the game. Bowen is also a little bit non-negotiable because the double game weeks are very, very appetizing. He's also in very, very good form at this point in time. He could be replaced with the Madison or Rafinha if you actually have more money. or maybe even Gray could be if you actually have more team value than me. So that's an interesting thing. I've gone with Gray because he has the Norwich fixture on 22, which is going to be really, really nice to have. And the double game weeks for Everton, as we actually saw just now, are going to be quite interesting. So that's kind of why I have Gray in the structure. Now, Kane is going to be someone that we can actually discuss a little bit more. Kane is someone who, in this structure, is someone that I like to have because I actually think Spurs have much better double game weeks than any other teams with premiums, right? Lukaku is an interesting, Vardy is injured, and Ronaldo for me just isn't consistent enough. I think we have seen a great game with Ronaldo versus Burnley where he got 1 goal, 1 assist. I would say it was a bit more of a flukier game. Clearly he was in position to get the tap in, which I think was completely deserved, but the thing such as the assist to McTominay is something else to be kind of debated about, right? Ronaldo still has looked good in games, but I don't think they're building enough chances, and versus some tougher teams, even though Burnley I think is arguably a team that defends quite well, I actually think that the United fixtures are still a little bit tough, especially when we're saying that they're going to face versus Aston Villa, who seem to have defended quite competently, Wolves, who have defended quite competently over the course of the season, West Ham maybe a little bit less so, but that's kind of how I see things right now. I think Kane is interesting because if let's say I roll the transfer on 21 and I go into 22 with two free transfers, or sorry, and I go into 23 with two free transfers, then I can probably actually skip away from this Chelsea game and go into Kevin De Bruyne away from Kane. So that's an interesting opportunity for me to maybe go into something like a Broya at that point in time, and then actually go into Kevin De Bruyne at that point in time as well. I have a lot of money to actually do that. I can even push up Broya to another attacker at that point in time. There's probably not going to be too many options there, but that's also a possibility, right? If I want to go for a triple up with City where I include De Bruyne into my team, that's another possibility that I can see in the future if you actually roll these transfers. And theoretically, as long as there's no major COVID postponements where the entirety of my wildcard team suddenly gets hit with COVID or all the fixtures are postponed once again, this is a very kind of good structure to kind of hopefully base a roll and a double transfer. And that could also be, with the transfer that I showed just now, a very easy move back into Salah in the near future. I could even maybe move away from someone like Bowen if I need to kind of accommodate that, but we'll see how things go. As far as Antonio and King, I think they're non-negotiables. King for me is interesting because he has Norwich in 23, then he's got all those double game weeks, so it's very easy to kind of fit him into my team. And Antonio the same, where he faces Leeds and probably Norwich as well in 22 or 21. So that is a big plus of Antonio. I also prefer him over Watkins because he still has better underlying stats. I don't think Aston Villa are creating enough chances for Watkins to be worthwhile, especially since he's off pens, which is the same situation that Antonio finds himself in, right? There is, of course, the possibility to go into Dominic Calvert-Lewin as well. He's an interesting option, but I kind of think I have enough of a hedge of that Everton attack with Gray, but we'll see how things go. As soon as the double game week fixtures will be announced, I'll probably kind of change the structure if surprise fixtures are added or if surprise fixtures are kind of removed from my expected double game week probabilities off of what Ben Crellin has kind of kindly provided to us as a community. But at this point in time, I think this is a good structure to attack a 2 premium template. It allows us to have good fixtures in 21. Even if we, for example, let's say I remove all the changes that I've had, if we look at picking a team out for 21, let's say if you can replace Shaw with whoever you want. If you're not a fan of United, that's totally fine. I just think Shaw has a little bit of upside. I might actually be going for Shaw just off the back of his Burnley performance. And then this team sort of plays itself, right? You wouldn't really necessarily play Lowton, even though they only have 1 game. Kane can be played off the bench if he has a single game week. If he has a double game week, then I probably could maybe move someone out of the team, such as a Gray. And then I can actually still play a 3 at the back, play Lloris, who's someone I would like to keep long term. And then Bowen and Antonio have good fixtures no matter what. Son and Kane have good fixtures no matter what. Foden has good fixtures versus an Arsenal side who we know will probably struggle versus a top 6 team like City. And then Jota is a little bit of a non-negotiable because he's a premium. In 23, as I said, if we move out of Kane, then we kind of get rid of that kind of big conflict where Kane has a bad fixture and the double up of Spurs doesn't look that interesting. And at the best, I can actually go for a Kevin De Bruyne who could last me to 28 because of the Salah blank on 27. Now, if you wanted Salah for Norwich, I completely understand. And I guess if you wanted to bench Salah on 27, that's also a possibility too. As I said, we can look at the fixture here where if Salah blanks in 27, but you keep him as a captain versus Norwich in 26, that could be a possibility too. I wouldn't really advise it, but who knows what's going to happen with the remainder of the league. Maybe there's going to be a game postponed to here, but unlikely because of cup fixtures. This is the kind of structure I'd like to go for, and that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys for the next video. Hope you guys stay tuned for the Premier League news for double game weeks, and let's see if we can build an effective wildcard draft to attack the bench boost.